But it also leads to, I think, some of the other announcements and conversations or news, I guess, out there, because one of the areas, and I'm going to give a minor plug here. So one of my clients that I'm working with is a company called Symphony AI, and they
Mhm.
in part play in the IT service management space. But one of the things that they announced at this conference while I was there was their own Copilot.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that's interesting is it's based on the Azure OpenAI underlying platform, but they built it purpose built for IT management. So they've infused a whole bunch of data into it, and I think it's a signal of, I think, where this is going. Right, I'm fairly, I'll call it middle of the road on the Microsoft Copilot versions of it, because they're so generic and they're so
Right.
productivity based, and it's so hard to drive justification. We've talked about this in the past. But I think what we're seeing, and Amazon officially, they'd announced it before, right? Amazon Q, but they officially released it. Is that what this is?
Mhm.
And I think it's a clear signal of their direction of where I think this is all going. That assistants, chatbots, copilots, whatever you want to call them, are only going to be valuable as we infuse business data into them, so they can actually be contextually relevant. And so that way, I thought was an interesting and positive sign.
Yeah, there's definitely a race right now to get out the generative AI assistants as well as the best models ever. We are either bringing up a model or an assistant practically every week, and I think it's important to discuss not just to keep up with the Joneses, but because every large technology company is trying to show their reference technology standard that they expect as a starting point for either generative AI or the outputs associated with generative AI. And it's important to know what those standards are. What is the actual starting point that you're working with? What are the APIs that you're able to have? What are you able to do from an application development perspective with all of this stuff? And if you don't keep track of what is coming out, you don't even know where to start with this. And it's easy to say, well, none of this works or all of this sounds the same because you haven't kept up. But last week, both Amazon and Anthropic came out with these business focused assistants saying we are ready to handle generative AI challenges for the business world. And not such a surprise for Amazon, but with Anthropic, I think it definitely shows that all of these AI nonprofits that we're talking about doing AI for the good of humanity aren't necessarily focused on just that anymore. At this point, they've all taken billions of dollars. And as I've said a bunch of times, from a VC funding perspective, the easy way to think about funding is that when you take funding, that is now basically your new annual revenue commitment. If you take $1 billion, you're committing to be a $1 billion revenue company. And that means changing your organization to fit that new goal and doing whatever it takes.
I was super excited when OpenAI was first founded, with this idea that tech companies were contributing in this open, but that ship sailed a long time ago, and I think that, frankly, it's just marketing or PR blather at this point. I mean, these companies are all straight tech companies, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think overall it's a good model, it's a good process, having a profit motive, and the investments are so huge. I don't know how there wouldn't be. So the only way, the original idea behind OpenAI was this idea that you contribute and that everyone benefits from the technology, and we have the sort of, had that actually survived, I think that could have worked and could have been cool. But the minute it failed, we were off to the races. and
Yep.
and I think it is what it is. What I will say, I look at these two announcements between the Amazon Q, and the Anthropic, the Claude one, and to me, they're wildly different approaches, and speak volumes of where this is going. The Anthropic play, at least as far as I can tell, is mostly, well, first of all, I think it's just an iPhone app, and secondly, it's really just the same sort of approach that going after what Microsoft or OpenAI is doing, which is pretty generic productivity driven chat,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of pieces, but it's really just an enterprise license of the same thing that we all use every day if we're on those platforms. Amazon Q, I thought, was different. I mean, there were really three parts to it. The Amazon Q first was a coding assistant, which basically competes with GitHub. That one, I'm like, yeah, okay, there's plenty of those out there. That one was just sort of an also ran. the second part of that same, because it was really two big buckets. The second part of that was though that their bot is trained on optimizing AWS. That I think
Mhm.
is incredibly. I mean, it's on the one hand so self-serving, but I think it's going to be an incredibly useful tool because so much of the challenges people have working with AWS or Azure or any of them is the ability to optimize those deployments and being able to do that. And so it has this deep awareness of how AWS configurations happen and being able to optimize that. So I think that could be super, super beneficial. And again, this idea of very pragmatic application of it. And then the second is they claim that they have the most connectors to enterprise business apps, and I listed, the who's who of enterprise apps
Mhm.
in their listing of it. And again, what I think is essential is that we are reaching this point where where we're going to reach this point where there's a shakeout. You don't want to have an entire host of co-pilots assistants. You want to have one. You want to have the ability, or at least in general terms, be able to go and say, ask it whatever, and get this information. So I feel like this was a very direct, um, deliberate approach to how to create a generative AI assistant that is genuinely useful in the enterprise, that provides that sort of contextual layer that I think most others haven't. And it's not lost on me that of course Amazon has made a massive investment in Anthropic, and so you have these two,
Mhm.
companies that are joined at the hip and yet wildly divergent approaches to the enterprise.
Yeah, with Amazon, I agree that the second part that you brought up around Amazon to optimize Amazon environments is very interesting. I feel like Amazon has put a lot of effort into pushing out tools associated with configuration and cost to help users to optimize their environments. And I find it interesting that Amazon is basically saying, if you're trying to optimize your Amazon environment, you can just trust us. We will give you the tools you need to make Amazon better. You know, trust us. We're not like the other foxes that go in the hen house. Like, we are the trusted fox, because we do everything else for you, and we're so good at it anyways. Um, so, but I think that despite that, it's always a little difficult to say, okay, vendor, you're going to tell me how to optimize vendor selections as the vendor. um, and so I'll be interested to see whether this leads to some Me Too offerings from third parties, or some sort of, or kind of a niche third party uh, kind of set of products that also do the same type of thing, but saying, but we're not Amazon, and we will help clean up your Amazon environment and your Microsoft environment and your Google environment.
Oh, yeah, so I do think that that is right, but I also think it's going to probably kick off a wave of organizations trying to create AI assistants to do this exact thing. Think of how
Mhm.
much time the average enterprise spends in configuring and deploying a piece of technology, and how having an assistant that actually understands how to do that could be super useful. I think that's actually a real threat to the traditional SIs in all of this, because as we start training assistants, because the big challenge with a lot of the applications that we think about with Gen AI is that there's all these variables and all of these unknowns. Well, with these are actually fairly capped environments. We have a known set of data of exactly what the platform looks like and how it operates,
Mhm.
and what this is designed for an algorithm. And so I think it could kick off this whole rash of using tools to configure tools. And there's a few companies that are doing this. Amelia is a conversational AI bot. They've been doing this for a while. They call it Amelia for Amelia, I think.
Mhm.
There's others that are going down that road, but